is the LGBT Show. I'm Ryan Taylor, your host, the founder of LGBT Financial and the LGBT Show. I'm glad to have Misty K here with me. Had the chance to meet Misty a few weeks ago at the Utah Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce breakfast, and I'm excited that she was willing to be our inaugural guest on the show. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. So just to, I kind of want to get to know you first before we delve into the politics and the work stuff, right? What do you do for fun? What makes you tick?
Well, I just to play a lot of video games, stuff like that. That used to be my hobby. I haven't had any time to do that. I mean, last time I played video games before I won the nomination, so
okay.
It's been quite a while, so I don't have time for stuff like that anymore. I like to read like current events.
Okay.
I used to read. I still do keep up on it because I'm running for office, but I like to read current events. How I keep informed on issues.
Excellent. What's your favorite source of that news for current events?
I just Google news search on topics that interest me. Usually, it's like we have a few like YouTube channels I subscribe to that are like news related. But
okay, good, very good. So video games. For those out there who are video gamers, this is somebody who can relate to you. I mean, that doesn't come up very commonly. In politics, what is your favorite genre of video game?
Probably because I'm a millennial, and it's my generation. I mean, if I was elected as senator, I'd be the first millennial to U.S. Senate, so I think that might be
that is true.
Part of what. But I always liked the role-playing games. I've played most of the Final Fantasy games. I played Dragon Quest, Breath of Fire, those type of games.
Okay.
Liked all those role-playing games.
Excellent. I myself am not a gamer, and I've always been envious of those who could. I have hand-eye coordination. I don't have that hand-eye coordination, so
you don't need to play a role-playing game. I mean, they're more story-based.
Well, maybe I'll have to get into it. Yeah, that's awesome. Just a little bit more about you. Tell me about your upbringing, like your background, where you're from, what brought you to where you are today.
So, I was born in Salt Lake City back in 1985. I've lived in Utah my entire life. I was raised LDS. I actually haven't been in church for a long time because I had some issues with them. Didn't feel welcome anymore, but my mom still goes to church once in a while. My whole family's LDS. All my friends are LDS. It just kind of, it's always kind of brought up in the Utah culture, understand the values here, understand kind of the politics of the state. I think that probably helped me as someone running for office in the States. And, and what makes, like that, and I guess what got me interested in politics is just, I've always kept informed on the issues, always pay a lot of attention to current events, and I just decided to run for office because I felt like I had to. I wanted issues I care about to have voice, and I didn't really like the other Democrat who was running for the nomination, and I challenged him for it and won because I thought he was wrong issues, and a lot of people agreed with me, and I won the nomination.
Excellent. I appreciate that, and I think it speaks a lot to your character. I think that both Utah and the nation in general need more people who are not only willing to get on Facebook and point out the issues they feel are wrong with the candidates that are running, but are willing to put themselves out there and say, you know what, I'm going to put my own reputation and my own self on the line and try to be a better option for people. So I really respect that. So thank you for doing that.
Well, there's a place to be a keyboard warrior. It's how I was a keyboard warrior most of my like late teens and early 20s. That's how I became informed on issues, how I learned, and by debating these issues online on internet forums. That's how I became more politically aware, and I think it's helped me. Probably it should help me converse with people, and and one more thing for sure said about my background is I actually work at a grocery store, so I'm like a working class background, which something that is grossly underrepresented in Congress. Supposed to have a representative government, but currently it's kind of like a government of by and for the millionaires.
Yeah.
And we need people who understand what average people go through on a daily basis, and need people who live paycheck to paycheck, who knows what it's like to be poor or middle class. And I am from that background. It's what I do. It's my life.
Absolutely. And remember where you're originally from here in Utah?
I was born in Salt Lake City.
All right. So right in the center of it.
Yep, I've lived in Salt Lake County my whole life. I was born in Salt Lake City. From 4 to 13, I lived in Midvale, which is also in Salt Lake County, and then since 13, I've lived downtown. So.
All right. So you're grossly aware of all the issues that are presented in not just the state of Utah, but especially in the capital. Mm-hmm. That's very important. What do you see as a member of the LGBT community? What are the most important issues in your eyes facing the LGBT community here?
Well, we have a lot of problems like LGBT homeless, especially among our youth. A lot of the youth homeless centers, they'd say it's like probably majority of the people who come into that they're helping are LGBT. So I think we need to do something about homelessness, especially among LGBT youth. We did pass some protections last year for employment and housing for LGBT people in the state, which is very good. I think we need to do more, but that is a great first step. Because we want everybody to have access to housing and employment. That should, again, help some of the homelessness, but we do have to, I think, kind of change the culture, because the LGBT youth homelessness is a lot to do with culture, with parents who aren't accepting, and I think we need to, keep working on saying that everyone needs to be treated with love and compassion, that we're all, just because we're different doesn't mean we're don't deserve love and compassion. And that's the message we need to get out, the culture we need to build, and that everyone's deserving of love and compassion, everyone's deserving of equal treatment and full equality under the law.
All right, that's awesome. Now, in my research, and of course there's been quite a bit of news media coverage, we have now, for the first time ever, and at the same time, 2 transgender women who have won primaries for seats in Congress. And the other is in Colorado, also named Misty. So that's coincidental, but
so I won a statewide primary for U.S. Senate race here in Utah. The other lady, Misty K, she wrote a primary for a congressional district 5 in Colorado. But neither one of us actually the first major party trans person for a congressional seat. That honor actually goes to Karen of Vermont, who had the Republican nomination for House of Representatives back in the year 2000, and she ran up against the incumbent at that time, which was Bernie Sanders.
All right. That's interesting history.
Yeah, I'm like, but her name was Karen.
I don't know how I missed that.
She only got 19% of the vote, but that's, so it was a good showing for a first trans person, but you know what? She was a Republican running against Bernie Sanders, so her policies probably weren't that good.
Yeah, sure. That's very interesting. So hopefully this election cycle will see someone actually win the election.
Yes,
and win the seat.
The goal. That's the goal.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So in determining to run for a position in our government and to be a legislator, who or what is your inspiration to do that?
Well, I said it was never really my plan to pursue a career in politics. It just, like I said, this year, I was so disappointed with the guy that I was running against. He was, a self-described conservative. He said he was pro-life. He wrote this op-ed where he came out against Planned Parenthood, recommended having an investigation, and it was like, I didn't find that just unacceptable, but offensive, especially for someone that wants to be the Democratic nominee in a statewide race. I don't want somebody that agrees with Republicans. I want somebody who wants to stand up to the Republicans and say, no, you're wrong on this issue. We need to protect Planned Parenthood because it provides important services for women and for people who can't afford necessary health care, for reproductive health care. Absolutely.
And I think that a big misunderstanding in the state of Utah is that Planned Parenthood is just an abortion clinic, and it's not. It's so much more than that. And it's so necessary for so many women. So that's awesome. Here in Utah, obviously, we have an interesting demographic, very Republican-dominated state, very religiously dominated state. What is it like to run for a political position in the state of Utah?
It's probably not much different than running for politics any other day. I haven't had any pushback from that. People always say, don't you get a lot of hate for being trans? Like, no, not really. It's just nobody seems to really care about that when it comes to local media. They're more cared about the issues, and which is good. I think that's what it needs to be about. It might be Republican dominated, but I think it's changing. And I think we have an opportunity. I think the demographics are absolutely changing. That's apparent. It's also a really young state, and a lot of younger people, like millennials, they have very different views on most issues. I mean, polls show that they're more liberal on every issue, and that's true of the evangelical millennials. That's true of the Mormon millennials. They are more accepting of LGBT people. I mean, it's not even really an issue for them, and I think that's, as they become the dominant force in the politics here, I think the politics of the state will change. And, I think that might happen sooner than people realize.
Good. A necessary change with a focus on real issues.
Mm-hmm.
Good. One of the issues that you've brought up in your campaign is the lack of equality in wages.
Yeah.
And that you would like to see the minimum wage raised to $15 an hour. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so raising the minimum wage is popular. I mean, polls show nationwide that raising the minimum wage is something which is supported by a majority. Just last week, Public Policy Polling had a poll of Utah voters where 61% of voters said they wanted minimum wage to be raised in the state. So raising the minimum wage, there is popular polling support for it, and and I think it's because most people recognize that $7.25 an hour is not a living wage. You can't live on that in Utah or anywhere else in the country, and it's kind of an insult to working people. And when you pay low wages like that, the taxpayers end up subsidizing those low wages with food stamps, with assisted housing, with heating, and other things. And one report said that just Walmart employees nationwide, their employers are getting paid about $6.2 billion a year of taxpayer money. All nationwide, all corporations, about $147 billion. That's a lot of money that could be going elsewhere if we made these corporations pay their workers a living wage. And it's not that I'm anti-business or anti-corporation, but reality is, no business is profitable without the talent and labor of its workers. So those workers deserve to share in the fruits of that labor, and they should be paid a living wage. And when we talk about inequality, you look at the wage gap by women or by people of color or the LGBT community. They're the ones who are disproportionately making the low wages. So if you raise the minimum wage, it will help those groups a lot more, because they're the ones disproportionately making minimum wage or near it.
Okay, that's very good. Very good points. Let's look down the road a little bit. Kind of look through the mirror. Say we get past the election and you win. You have 6 years, right, until the next election, until your seat comes up for re-election. What would you like to see happen in Congress in those 6 years? Well,
first thing I'd like to see happen, if for whatever reason we still have a vacancy on the Supreme Court, we need to get that filled, because it's insane that we've now set a record for the longest Supreme Court nominee has been named but not confirmed. We've set a record, and it's, my opponent, Mike Lee, is not in favor of giving him a hearing, and despite, again, that same public policy poll I cited earlier, 65% of Utahns want him to have a hearing. If for whatever reason you don't think he's qualified for the job, that's why you give him a hearing. You can ask him questions, find out if he's qualified or not, and then you can vote him up or down on the merits. But by failing to give him a hearing, Mike Lee isn't doing his job. So that would be first thing we would need to do. Other things I'd like to do, again, I'd like to see us raise a minimum wage. I'd like to see us do $15 an hour over a several year period with an adjustment for inflation thereafter, so it doesn't fall behind again. I'd like to see us pass an equal rights bill that gives full equality LGBT people in all areas of life, not just employment, housing, which is very important, but also medical care and services and the ability to purchase products. That they need to have full equality under law without exemptions or exceptions. Because we want, its 14th Amendment is supposed to guarantee equal protection under law. So, but unfortunately, we don't have that. So we need to legislate that.
All right, that's very, very good points, and I can't say that I disagree. So, yeah. Speaking of some of the issues that you and Mike Lee differ on, what do voters and I guess just the residents of Utah need to know about Mike Lee? Now we're not a political commentary show, But I think it is important to get out what you, as a candidate, feel people need to know about Mike Lee. That you are. I guess, if you were elected, you would be avoiding that.
Yeah. Well, I think Mike Lee's most notorious thing was shutting down the government in 2013. He was like one of the leaders of that government shutdown, and that really hurt a lot of Utah people. 35,000 people in the state of Utah work for the federal government. The federal government is the largest employer, and during the government shutdown, all those people weren't spending money because they weren't sure if they're going to go to work again when they're going to get another paycheck again. So that was a very problematic thing. But in addition to that, we have 5 national parks in the state of Utah. We have multiple national monuments. We have a lot of national forest land, and there's a lot of people who depend on tourism, and especially in like some of the smaller communities like Moab, Torrey, and other smaller communities in Utah. They depend on people to coming to the national parks to rent their hotels or visit their restaurants to buy stuff from their shops. And when all the government shut down, all those national parks and monuments were closed, and nobody was coming to their cities, and so it hurt the economies of those cities. And then other themes Mike Lee's done that I really disagree with is that he voted against renewing the Violence Against Women Act, which protects women from domestic abuse. He blocked aid to Flint during the water crisis, which would have helped give relief to a city where children are drinking water contaminated with lead. They need to have access to clean water. We need to solve that problem, and Mike Lee seems to be against children, he seems to be okay with children drinking contaminated water. So I think that's problematic. And, in July he introduced this horrible bill. He calls it, it's Orwellian in saying he calls the First Amendment Defense Act, but it's, would allow businesses to discriminate against LGBT people or anybody that's against their religion. So, they could theoretically, by worded, they could discriminate against, like, people who've been divorced or possibly interracial couples or anything. It'd be completely unconstitutional, but he introduced that into Congress back in July, so that's a very problematic bill that I would hope never passes, because I don't think it passed because it is unconstitutional, but he's okay with introducing legislation like that, so he's not a friend of the LGBT community or really people in general.
Yeah, that's interesting. When I heard about that act being presented for for discussion, it occurred to me that in addition to being able to discriminate against the LGBT community or specific demographics, it's I think what a lot of people don't understand, and especially in a Mormon-dominated state, that could also be religious discrimination from one sect against another. I think people haven't realized that.
Yeah. No, it's a terrible bill, and it shouldn't pass.
Yeah. All right. We're going to wrap up here real quick, but I do have 2 more questions for you. The first is, how can people get in touch with you, or not necessarily in touch with you, but learn your platform, kind of delve into it a little bit deeper? How can they find out more about you? So
I recommend visiting my website at mistyksnow.com, MISTYKSNOW. On there you can find my platform, you can find like a short biography. You'll also find links to my social media pages like my Facebook, my Twitter, my Instagram, and we post stuff to those too, which is a good place to also find out more about my platform. So that'd be where I'd recommend. All right. The second is, I think that in many states people don't realize who they can vote for. Who can vote for you? So U.S. Senate is a statewide race. The senator, they represent the whole state. So if you're registered to vote in Utah, you can vote for me. It's, it doesn't matter if you live in Logan or St. George or Moab. You can vote for me if you're registered to vote in Utah. And if you're not registered to vote, it's pretty easy to register to vote in Utah. You can do it online at vote.utah.gov. And most counties now do vote by mail, so they'll actually send the ballot to your home address if you're registered to your current address. Excellent. Now, just kind of last statement for those who are listening out there and watching, how would you describe yourself? How would you describe Misty K. Snow in 3 words? Equality, compassion, vision. All right, excellent. Well, thank you for joining me, Misty. Thank you to all those who have been watching. We appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you coming on the show. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.